So you've created your course or your workshop or your program, you're getting it in front of people and doing all the right things. But overall, people aren't buying. So what do you do? Step one isn't just posting more content, it isn't paying for ads, and it definitely isn't beating yourself up. Instead, the first and most important step is to make sure that your offer has everything it needs to sell. Because right now there could be hidden gaps and opportunities that could be hamstringing your efforts. And until you diagnose and address them, you basically have a leaky bucket. This is why I created a really simple tool called the 10-minute offer unlock. And in this video, I want to show you how it works. Hopefully by the end, you'll come away knowing exactly how to improve your offers so you can start having more fun, helping more people, and ultimately start selling more stuff with less effort. However, instead of just telling you what the offer unlock involves, I thought it might be more interesting and useful to demonstrate it in action. So the plan is to run an offer through it that many of you will be familiar with already, which is Tom Noske's Time to Build. For anyone who doesn't know, Tom Noske is a massive name in the content creation and online info space. And from what I've seen in Time to Build, he basically shows you how to turn your skills into a business with kind of content creation at the core. I think it's worth mentioning that I don't know Tom personally at all, but his content has helped me a lot over the years, especially since my last business died. So in the unlikely event that you haven't come across him before, I highly recommend checking him out. As a quick aside though, if I'm really honest, I feel a bit weird about making this video in this way. That's partly because there's a lot of crossover between Time to Build and the offers that I put out, but it's mainly because talking about someone else's offer publicly like this kind of feels just a bit questionable. And then on top of all that, there's the fact that Tom is just light years ahead of me in terms of results, so it's a bit like, who am I to give him advice? So I just wanted to make it very clear that this video isn't any sort of critique. My goal here is simply to demonstrate the offer unlock, share with you some of what I've learned about making successful offers along the way, and I thought this would be a more engaging way to do it. Anyway, I hope this doesn't come across weirdly. I hope you find it useful, and if somehow this video ever crosses his desk, Tom, I hope you don't mind me using Time to Build for this example. In terms of who I am, I think I'll skip that introduction just so we can get into things. But if you do want more information on who I am and why anyone watching this should listen to what I have to say on making offers, I'll pop a link in the description to my website. But with all that said, let's dive into the offer unlock. The offer unlock, or the 10-minute offer unlock, is a simple self-diagnostic tool that's designed to give you a visual depiction of the strength of your current offers. The idea is that it basically lets you pressure test whatever you're putting out to the market, ultimately trying to help you craft offers that you're confident in and that maximize the chances of success. It revolves around something I call the 6 Ps, which are promise, path, price or pricing, protection, perks, and push. The name, the offer unlock, comes from the fact that these 6 components remind me of the pins inside a lock. So for a lock to turn, each pin inside has to lift into perfect alignment. And even if one of them is even slightly misaligned, it just won't budge. And that's similar with offers. Like, you can be doing almost everything right, but if you're missing even 1 or 2 key elements, then you're going to experience significantly more friction when it comes to getting the sale. If you want to go through the offer unlock while you're watching this or at any point in the future, I put a link to it down in the description. It's totally free. And although this video is going to go on for quite a bit longer, in general, it should only take 10 minutes or less to complete. When you download it, you get these 2 pages, one with the questions for each of the 6 Ps, where you give yourself a score from 0 to 10, and then another with the matrix, where you mark each of those scores down. The idea is that once you've then been through each of these questions and marked down your scores, you can connect up the dots on the matrix and you end up with this nice visual sense of the strength of your offer and where any gaps and opportunities might exist. So that is the theory. Now let's go through Time to Build and see it in practice, starting with the promise. So your promise is the central outcome that people buy into and work towards if they accept your offer. It isn't what we typically mean by a promise, like you aren't promising someone that they're going to get this outcome. You're simply saying that this is the outcome that you're going to work toward. In the context of offer making, the best promises are clear, specific, congruent with people's current situation, and objective and measurable. In other words, different people should be able to see your offer and come away thinking they're going to get exactly the same thing if they buy. So when it comes to the offer unlock, we start by asking, is there a clear outcome someone gets if they buy? If there isn't, you score 0. If there is, you move to the second question. How clear, specific, believable, and tangible is it to a stranger seeing your offer for the first time? Then you score that promise from 1 to 10, where 10 basically just means very. So when you look at the time to build landing page, you can see Tom Noske's promise right up there at the top, which is where it should be. Time to build will help you grow a personal brand people trust and turn what you already know into a business that pays you 10K and up every single month, whether you have 500 followers or 50,000. So this is a solid promise, which you'd expect from a guy like Tom Noske. As he said, the program helps you hit 10K and up. That's clear, specific, and tangible, like there's nothing ambiguous about it. You know exactly what you're signing up for, and importantly, you'd also know when you'd been successful because you'd be making at least 10K per month from your new business. However, I do think there's some scope for improvement. For example, I'd probably include a clearer time frame here, and maybe even just aim to be a bit more specific about the promise itself. Like a bit further down the page when you get to the phases section, which we're going to talk about next, there's mention of a 90-day time frame. But at that point, there's no talk of the 10K per month. Instead, at the end of phase 3, it says the goal, make back your entire year of membership and then some. The guarantee floor is 2K, but that's the safety net, not the target. So there doesn't seem to be a specific time frame around making that 10K. Instead, they're saying you'll make at least 2K in the first 90 days. And that's something they're guaranteeing, which we'll talk more about later. So I think what's happening here is that Tom and his team have broken down the offer into what's called the transition and the transformation, where the transformation is a big overarching outcome that you deliver for people over an extended time period, and the transition is kind of an initial stepping stone along the way to it. The idea is that you sell the transition first because smaller commitments are always going to be easier to sell, whereas that big transformation might be too much for people to buy into at their current level. It gets the ball rolling, the outcome is also easier to deliver on, and then it opens the door to a conversation around what's next, which is where you can kind of have a conversation around continuing on the road to the overarching transformation. So for me, the way this comes across in Time to Build is that 10K per month promise is the transformation. Then the 2K 90 days is a bit like the transition. But in my opinion, it could be a little bit clearer. And so part of me would like to see more of a specific time frame around that 10K benchmark, as well as a specific dollar amount for the 90 days. Like they're saying that 2K is kind of guaranteed and that the goal is to kind of make back what you would spend in a year of joining Time to Build within those first 90 days. So although they've kind of honed in on the 2K mark and they're guaranteeing that, there's no specific promise to match that 90-day time frame. So honestly, I'd be tempted to at least test flipping that promise around, where instead of starting with, we're going to help you make 10K per month and above, the promise could be more like package your knowledge into an online offer and make 2K from it within the first 90 days without needing prior experience or a big audience. If he did that, Tom could mention the broader transformation of the 10K, like that being their long-term goal. But the first step, that initial commitment, is 90 days where you work on making 2K. And so basically, I'd just be interested to see how that converted relative to the current promise. Because one part of successful offer making is making sure that your promise is congruent with where your clients are currently. Like you want to make sure that the offer you're making them isn't too far removed from their current level, because if it is, it might feel a bit too unbelievable. The concept of hitting that goal might just feel too abstract. And you have to be able to kind of visualize yourself hitting the goal. And so when you look at Time to Build and the 10K promise through that lens, where they seem to be targeting a bit more of a beginner, at least in terms of packaging your skills into an offer, 2K is arguably much more congruent than 10K. Like it's less of a leap. And so anyway, when it comes to the offer unlock and giving this a score out of 10, all told, I'd probably give it an 8. However, before I move on, I do want to mention a really important caveat to everything I was just saying, which is that Tom has a huge amount of social proof, which he's done a really good job of emphasizing throughout this landing page. And so all of that social proof is going to function as kind of a force multiplier in terms of boosting people's confidence in his ability to get them the result. So simply put, he can tell someone who's new that he can make them 10K per month, and they'll still feel confident that he can do it because he's proved that he's done it multiple times before. And that in turn feeds into a much bigger point. Tom obviously doesn't just have stacks of social proof, he also has a huge audience and personal brand and masses of authority in his space as a result. And so all of that combines to take the pressure off his offer, because although the strength of your offer is 100% essential when it comes to getting the yes, the ease with which you can sell it is still predicated on your current audience. Basically, which is just common sense, I guess, people in Tom's position will always find it easier to sell their offer compared to someone who is newer, even if that other person has the better offer. So in this case, Tom can get away with making big promises and missing out on certain details here and there if that's what he's done, simply because he's in such a strong position because of his audience. Anyway, with that massive side note out of the way, let's turn to the next P, which is path. The path basically involves laying out for potential clients how you're going to get them the outcome that you defined in the promise. You're breaking down or chunking up in broad strokes what happens from start to finish. This is something that I think most people miss out on when making offers, but it's really valuable and important psychologically because at least in the client space, we're not actually selling anything tangible. Like it's not as if you're going into a furniture store, for example, and just pointing at the couch that you want and taking it home that day. People are buying a result that doesn't exist yet. And so by presenting them with a path, you make something that is currently invisible and abstract feel much more concrete and believable. You help them see the result in their mind's eye, picture themselves on the path of attaining their outcome. And so in the process, you make the offer far more appealing. And so when it comes to the offer unlock, here we ask, have you laid out the key phases people go through to achieve the outcome? If no, you score 0. But if yes, you then ask, how well would they be able to picture themselves going through the process of achieving the outcome? Like I mentioned earlier, Tom has included the path. He has this very clear section where he outlines the 3 main phases involved. So you know exactly what's going to happen and when. Part of me would be tempted to move this section further up the landing page, but I'm guessing he's split tested all sorts of things and he's found that this converts well. I might also be tempted to mention any of the mechanisms and big ideas he has that helps people get the results just to create a bit more intrigue in the offer. But again, this path is solid, and so I'd give it a 9 out of 10. From there, we move on to the next P, which is price. Of all the P's, price was the trickiest for me to sum up in a question on the offer unlock, basically because there's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to setting a price or defining a pricing plan. Several factors come into play here, including confidence levels, actually, like confidence in yourself and confidence in what you're selling. So anyway, the best I could come up with for a question for price on the offer unlock is, have you set a clear price, which everyone's going to answer yes to? And then how well does your price and pricing structure maximize conversions without sacrificing potential revenue? So when we look at time to build right up at the very top, you have the option to join for $46 a week. Charging per week like that is a clever strategy because it keeps the now number nice and low, like the amount of money someone has to pay today to get the thing they want. People tend to make buying decisions based on the amount of money in their bank account right now. So the less of a dent you're going to make in it, the easier you'll find it to sell your stuff. And that's exactly what happens when you charge weekly. Like you could charge $1,000 a month, or you could charge $250 a week. And because you can get started for $250, it becomes a much more compelling price. And there are other benefits here in terms of paid in full. So let's say we stick with that $1,000 example per month. That's $12K paid in full. And if you offer a 20% discount, you're looking at $9,600. But if you charge weekly, and so it's $250 a week, when you multiply that by 52, you get $13,000. And so now you can offer an even bigger discount on the paid in full, but you'll still make more money. And there are other benefits and tactics you can use to facilitate the sale with weekly pricing, but I'll leave it there for now. The main point is that charging per week has lots of benefits. Even if in Tom Noske's case, he's not actually charging per week, he's just using that to help people lean into the offer. If you click on any of the options you have to join, it takes you through to the checkout page and you see you're paying $200 a month, which he also talks about on the landing page. In my mind, this would be one way to improve things in terms of price. So actually charging $46 a week. I imagine, because I've experienced this before, that the reason he hasn't done this is simply a byproduct of whatever platform he's selling on, not providing that functionality, not giving him the option to charge per week. Maybe wrong on that, but I've had that before. And so I wonder if that's what's happening here. Anyway, regardless of whether he charges $46 a week or $200 a month, that's still a really affordable price point. Like, I know it might sound like a lot, especially if you've not been in this space for as long. Like for me, I know a few years ago that would have felt like a really big investment, but having been in this space for a while now and joined some of these masterminds and paid for coaching, you realize that charging $200 a month is really not a lot at all, and that there are people probably offering similar things for 10 times that price per month, not even offering anywhere near the same level of support or stuff that Tom provides here. And so $200 a month, that is incredibly cheap, especially when you consider that I think previously to join Time to Build, you were paying $2,000 for a 6-week cohort. So this price is super compelling relative to that as well. And so I'm assuming that he's actually got some sort of upsell offer in the back end. And so the purpose of this one is really just to maximize volume, maximize acquisition, maximize the number of people who join. Like, he might just be wanting to make his stuff more accessible, and it seems like he's trying to keep his delivery burden much lower now. But I've also seen his content in the past where he said that he's quite motivated by money. So I'm just assuming that in the back end somewhere there's an offer that he has to upsell people into something that is much more limited capacity and higher touch, where he's providing much more value for a higher price. And then because he's getting so many people through the door with this one at the lower price point, he can then cherry pick from the people who join to find the most suitable members for that upsell offer. But if nothing else, if he doesn't have that in place and we were working together, that is something that I would recommend doing if he was looking to maximize revenue. And it's actually kind of a core premise behind what I call an offer ladder, which is where you take your one core offer, which again is what Tom Noske has here, and you sell people into different dynamic levels of support, where at those lower levels, you provide less input for a much smaller price. And at those higher levels or rungs, you're offering much more support for a much higher price and helping people get faster results in the process. It actually wouldn't surprise me if Tom Noske's using some kind of iteration of an offer ladder here. But anyway, that's kind of an aside. The point here is that the price he's set for Time to Build now is super compelling, and I imagine there are some mechanisms in place for him to increase revenue in the back end as well. If nothing else, this is a membership model, so although you're paying $200 a month, whereas before there was always pressure to fill spots, which I don't think he had any trouble doing, but in theory he could have had kind of a roller coaster of revenue where he was getting a lot of money some months and not as much in others. And so this way, at least he's optimizing for recurring revenue, which is going to keep things much more consistent month to month. And all of that is to say that I would score him very highly on price. So let's give this one a 9 on the offer unlock too. From there, we move on to the next P, which is protection. So protection is basically just a guarantee. It isn't always essential or even recommended. Like, this is the one P where answering no can sometimes be helpful. And that's because whenever you lower the risk of joining, you open the door to a lower quality of client. So the general rule is to be a bit cautious with this one, but there's no doubt that it helps when it comes to facilitating sales, particularly when you're a bit newer and you have a smaller audience and less social proof. So when it comes to the offer unlock, we ask, have you included anything that lowers the buyer's perceived risk of purchasing? If you have, you then score yourself from 1 to 10, where 10 means you've lowered that risk to almost nothing, and therefore made it much easier for people to take a risk and buy. And so with time to build, there is a guarantee. When you scroll down the page, you can see that it's basically make 2K in 90 days or get your money back. So that is obviously very compelling as far as a guarantee goes, especially when you see further down the page that you can leave at any point with no consequences. Like, you're not committing to anything if you join. And again, like I mentioned earlier, anything that is a lower commitment is going to be easier for people to buy, which means that in my mind, at least, this is another form of protection because it lowers the risk of joining even more. And so all told, I'd score this one a 10 in terms of protection on the offer unlock. Next, we move to perks. A perk is basically just a bonus. So here we ask, have you included any bonuses or extras? And as far as I can see, there aren't any that are described, at least on the landing page for joining Time to Build. Tom's done a really good job of outlining exactly what you get if you join, but I don't see any kind of exclusive perks for signing up. And again, this isn't necessarily the end of the world. Like, you have to look at the offer in context. Like I talked about before, Tom's in such a strong position with his audience and brand and authority that there's less pressure on his offer. And so he's unlikely to need that many incentives, especially when you consider that the price is now $200 to join per month versus what it was before at that 2K for 6 weeks price for the cohort. In fact, if I was Tom, I'd actually be tempted to include that fact somewhere on the landing page that you can suddenly join for 10% of what people paid in the past. But regardless of that, for perks, we would score 0 and we'd move on to the final P, which is push. So a push is basically just a reason for people to act now versus later. So this is one of the most important components of any offer, because as humans, we almost always need a reason to pull the trigger. Otherwise, it's just too easy to put the decision off. Whereas a push essentially evokes FOMO, like a fear of missing out. You're saying that this thing that you want is going to be taken away unless you make a decision and act now. In other words, there are consequences to not making a decision, and you apply them in one of two ways: scarcity and urgency. Scarcity means you have limited availability, and urgency just means that you've set a deadline. As a quick aside, bonuses can be another form of push, but only when they're used in combination with scarcity or urgency. So for example, the first 5 people who join get X, that's scarcity, or join before date to get bonus, and that would be urgency. The idea here is that you're rewarding fast action because more often than not, fast movers also make the best clients. So for this part of the offer unlock, we ask, have you included a genuine deadline and or limited availability? If you have, you then score yourself from 1 to 10, where 10 means that there are very clear and compelling consequences to not joining. When I look at time to build, I actually don't see anything that would tick that scarcity or urgency box. I hope I'm not missing anything, but let's say for the sake of argument, there isn't any scarcity or urgency. This is definitely something that Tom could include if he ever needed or wanted to boost conversions even more. I'm sure he's well aware of this strategy. I know in the past I've been part of his email list, and in some of the emails I got, there's definitely some urgency being applied there. So maybe if you're on his email list or something, he's got something set up in the back end to apply the scarcity or urgency there instead. Either way, technically this would be 0 on the offer unlock. And with that done, we can now join up each of these dots to get that visual depiction of the strength of Tom's offer. So here's the finished product. As you'd expect, time to build is very well put together as far as offers go. And obviously I haven't done this with Tom next to me, and I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So even though perks and push appear to be the big areas of potential improvement here, that isn't necessarily a true reflection of this offer. But regardless, like I said in the introduction, the point of this exercise wasn't to give like an accurate demonstration of the time to build offer. It was just to demonstrate how the offer unlock works and how you can use it to kind of diagnose any potential gaps or opportunities or things you can do to improve the success of any offers that you're putting together and putting out to the market. I hope this has been useful. And again, if you want to check out the 10-minute offer unlock and get more insights on how to apply it to your specific business as well as an exclusive offer, then click that link in the description, and I hope you find it valuable. Finally, if you like the idea of using your offer to make more money in less time, check out this video next where I walk you through some powerful strategies for doing it. Thanks again for watching this one though. Please hit subscribe if you got any value from it, and I will see you in the next one.